The first sign of trouble was subtle, a faint ripple in the fabric of the void. The SCI-FI monitoring outpost, nestled in the nebula's shadow like a predator waiting to strike, detected the anomaly at 3:47 Standard Galactic Time. Aboard the station, Commander Skrull flicked her forked tongue with irritation as the warning signal pulsed through the control chamber. She had seen countless glitches in the nebula's interference-heavy expanse, but something about this one felt deliberate. "Report," she hissed, her scales shifting in agitation. The junior officer monitoring the sensor arrays clawed at his console, attempting to stabilize the readings. "Commander, the disturbance appears to be artificial. A mass is emerging from subspace, but it doesn't match any known SCI-FI or allied configurations." Skrull's slitted eyes narrowed. For centuries, the SCI-FI Dominion had reigned supreme in this sector, their fleets unmatched and their technology unrivaled. The nebula they occupied served as both a natural defense and a symbol of their dominance. No one dared challenge the Dominion here. Until now. The rippling distortion resolved into a form, an angular, brutish silhouette that defied the sleek curves of SCI-FI design. It was metallic, dark and jagged, radiating an aura of menace. Its edges shimmered with the residual energy of a violent subspace jump. "Identify that vessel," Skrull commanded, her voice sharp. The officer's claws skittered over the console again. A moment later, his head snapped up, his orange eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. "Commander, it's human." The chamber fell silent. Humans. The word alone was enough to unsettle even the most hardened SCI-FI. They were a species of paradoxes, fragile yet unyielding, primitive yet dangerously innovative. Their rapid expansion across the stars had been punctuated by brutality, their penchant for war unmatched by any other known species. The Dominion had encountered them once, decades ago, on the edges of explored space. That encounter had ended in bloody stalemate, a rare blemish on the SCI-FI's otherwise pristine record of conquest. Skrull's clawed hand clenched the armrest of her command chair. "Hail them," she ordered. The calm officer hesitated. "Commander, their weapon systems are active. Should we not hail them?" Skrull barked, her voice echoing through the chamber. The officer flinched and complied, sending a transmission to the vessel now looming ominously outside the station's perimeter. The response came swiftly, the display screen flaring to life with a stark utilitarian symbol, a single red fist encircled by broken chains. "Humanity's war emblem." A voice followed, deep and deliberate, dripping with the confidence of a predator who knows it is the apex. "This is Captain Elias Brand of the UNS Reclaimer. By entering this sector, we assert humanity's claim to these stars. Surrender immediately or face annihilation." The threat was blunt, lacking the nuance and veiled diplomacy typical of interstellar encounters. It was as if Captain Brand saw no need to posture. The message was simple: "We are here. You are in our way." Skrull rose from her chair, her serpentine form towering over the other officers. "Captain Brand," she hissed, her tone laced with contempt, "you have made a grave error in trespassing into SCI-FI space. Withdraw immediately, or you will be obliterated." The captain's image flickered for a moment before stabilizing. His expression did not change. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in a smirk. "Commander Skrull, is it? I suggest you reconsider. Humanity doesn't start wars, we finish them. And I assure you we have no intention of leaving." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving only the tension-filled hum of the station's systems. "Commander," the tactical officer interjected, his voice tight, "the Reclaimer is locking weapons on us. Their energy readings, they're off the scale. I've never seen anything like it." Skrull's claws scraped the armrest, her mind racing. This was no ordinary human ship. The UNS Reclaimer wasn't just a war vessel, it was a statement. The humans had sent it here deliberately, a challenge wrapped in firepower. "Raise shields and arm all weapons," she commanded. "Notify the fleet. If these humans want war, they will find themselves outmatched." The station's defenses roared to life, energy shields enveloping its sprawling structure while turrets emerged from concealed compartments. In the nebula's eerie light, the outpost transformed from a passive observer into a fortress bristling with deadly intent. But even as the SCI-FI prepared for battle, the Reclaimer remained motionless, a dark, silent monolith in the void. It was as if the humans were waiting, daring the SCI-FI to make the first move. "Commander, the fleet is responding," the communications officer reported. 2 battle cruisers and a dreadnought are en route. 20 minutes? Skrull nodded. They just needed to hold the line until reinforcements arrived. The humans may have been bold, but they were also reckless, a trait the SCI-F-I could exploit. "Open fire," she ordered. The station's weapons unleashed a barrage of energy beams, their brilliant arcs slicing through the void toward the human vessel. For a moment, it seemed as though the reclaimer would be overwhelmed. But then with a sudden burst of speed it moved. The ship's counterattack was devastating. It unleashed a volley of projectiles that moved too fast for the SCI-F-I targeting systems to track. The station's shields flared and buckled under the assault, and explosions rippled across its outer hull. "How is this possible?" Skrull snarled, gripping the edge of her console. The tactical officer's scales paled. "Commander, their weapons are bypassing our shields. It's as if they're designed specifically to counter our defenses." Skrull's mind raced. Had the humans studied SCI-F-I technology? Adapted to their tactics? The implications were chilling. Another explosion rocked the station, throwing officers from their posts. Skrull hissed in pain as sparks rained down from an overloaded console. "Status report," she demanded. "Shields at 20%, the tactical officer gasped. "Structural integrity failing on decks 3 through 7. The commander's eyes narrowed. This was no random act of aggression. The reclaimer hadn't stumbled into their sector by chance. This was a test, a warning, and perhaps a prelude to something far worse. As the station struggled to mount a defense, Skrull couldn't shake the growing realization: the humans hadn't come to negotiate. They hadn't come to intimidate. They had come to conquer. The anomaly solidified into a shape, cutting through the nebulous interference like a predator parting water. The vessel emerged, its angular silhouette backlit by the glowing tendrils of the nebula. It was massive, far larger than any SCI-F-I capital ship. Its hull was an unbroken expanse of black alloy, absorbing the faint starlight rather than reflecting it. "By the void," whispered the junior officer. The room was silent except for the low hum of the outpost systems. Commander Skrull's talons tapped against the armrest of her command chair. "Magnify and identify," she commanded, her voice calm but taut with tension. The officer complied, the central view screen zooming in on the vessel. It bore no sigils, no markings of allegiance, but its lines were unmistakable, angular, pragmatic, brutal. "Human design," the officer croaked, his scales paling. The word sent a chill through the chamber. The humans? They were supposed to be extinct. Centuries ago, the SCI-F-I Dominion had been part of the coalition that crushed the Terran Federation. The humans' colonies had been eradicated, their fleets reduced to smoldering wreckage, their homeworld scorched to ash. They had fought ferociously as only cornered prey could, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. When the war was over, the coalition dismantled every trace of their technology, their culture, their existence. The humans had been a footnote in history ever since, a cautionary tale of overreach and hubris. And yet, here was a human warship, alive and unmistakably hostile. Skrull hissed, her tail flicking in agitation. "Open a channel. If they've survived in some hidden corner of the galaxy, they must know the consequences of showing themselves here." The comms officer worked quickly, his claws flying over the interface. "Channel open, Commander." "This is Commander Skrull of the SCI-F-I Dominion," she began, her voice a sharp, predatory growl. "Identify yourselves and state your purpose in Dominion space. Any act of aggression will be met with annihilation." The warship didn't respond. Instead it began to move. It was slow at first, almost ponderous, like some ancient beast stretching after eons of slumber. But as its engines flared, the ship surged forward with terrifying acceleration, closing the distance to the outpost in seconds. "Shields up. Prepare to fire," Skrull barked. The outpost's defensive systems roared to life, and the station's batteries swiveled to lock onto the intruder. Pulses of plasma and kinetic rounds streaked toward the vessel, a dazzling array of firepower. The human ship didn't flinch. It didn't even slow down. The first salvo hit its hull and dissipated like water splashing against a cliff. The ship's black alloy seemed to absorb the energy, glowing faintly as it consumed the attack. What is that hull made of?" one officer gasped. "Focus," Skrull snapped. "Switch to high-yield torpedoes. Concentrate fire on its engines." The crew scrambled to comply, launching a volley of torpedoes that screamed through the void. This time the human ship reacted. Turrets unfolded from its hull with mechanical precision, spitting streaks of light that intercepted the torpedoes mid-flight. The explosions lit up the nebula, but the human vessel emerged unscathed, its course unchanged. "It's charging weapons," the tactical officer cried. On the view screen, the warship's bow began to glow, a faint red that deepened into a blinding crimson. The energy built rapidly, an ominous hum vibrating through the outpost's hull. Evasive maneuvers. All power to shields. Skrull roared, her voice cutting through the chaos. The human vessel fired. A single beam of red energy lanced forward, striking the outpost's shields. For a moment, the shields held, a shimmering barrier of blue light standing between the SCI-FI and annihilation. But the beam didn't relent. It burned hotter, brighter, until the shields collapsed in a burst of crackling energy. The beam sliced through the outpost's outer hull, carving a path of destruction. Explosions erupted across the station as systems overloaded and oxygen vented into the void. The command chamber shuddered violently, sparks raining from the ceiling. Damage report. Skrull demanded, gripping her chair as the floor beneath her quaked. Severe damage to sectors 3 through 7, the damage control officer shouted. Structural integrity is failing. We can't withstand another hit. Skrull's mind raced. Retreat wasn't an option. The outpost's engines were crippled. Calling for reinforcements would take too long, and even if they arrived, she wasn't sure they could stop this monstrosity. Commander, the ship is hailing us, the comms officer said suddenly, his voice trembling. Skrull's eyes widened. On screen. Now. The view screen flickered, and the image of the human warship was replaced by the face of its captain. He was human, unmistakably so, with pale skin, sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. His uniform was stark and utilitarian, devoid of any insignias or symbols of rank. This is Captain Elias Ward of the Retribution, he said, his voice low and even, yet carrying an edge of steel. Your species has much to answer for. Skrull bared her fangs. Your kind was destroyed. Your existence is a violation of the Accords. Stand down, or you'll face the full might of the Dominion. Ward tilted his head slightly as if amused. The full might of the Dominion? You misunderstand, Commander. This isn't a negotiation. This is judgment. The transmission ended abruptly, and the warship's weapons began to glow again. Brace for impact. Skrull shouted, her voice rising above the wail of the station's alarms. The second blast tore through the outpost like a knife through flesh, and the darkness of the void swallowed it whole. When Skrull regained consciousness, the command chamber was a haze of dim emergency lighting, smoke, and the acrid smell of burning electronics. The hum of the station systems was barely a whisper now, punctuated by the occasional groan of stressed metal. She coughed, clawing her way upright from where she'd been thrown against a console. Report, she rasped, her voice hoarse. For a moment there was no response. The room felt hollow, unervingly silent except for the flicker of broken displays. Slowly, movement stirred among the wreckage. A junior officer, bloodied but alive, dragged himself to his station. Commander, shields are gone. Hull integrity at 20%. Most systems are offline, he stammered, his voice weak. The human vessel has ceased fire. It's just hovering, watching, waiting. Skrull's eyes darted to the main view screen. Though fractured, it still displayed the massive silhouette of the Retribution, an unmoving specter against the nebula's eerie glow. It radiated menace, its silence more terrifying than its devastating firepower. Casualties? She demanded, her tone sharper now, trying to reassert control. The junior officer hesitated, his claws twitching nervously. Unknown, Commander. Internal sensors are down. Decks 3 through 7 are gone. We've lost containment on most lower levels. Survivors are scattered. Skrull cursed under her breath. The outpost, once a symbol of Dominion strength, was now a crippled husk. Her tail lashed behind her in frustration. How had it come to this? Before she could issue her next command, a new sound cut through the tension, a faint ping from the comms console. They're hailing us again, the comms officer muttered, his voice trembling. Skrull's claws dug into the armrest of her chair. Accepting the transmission felt like submitting to humiliation, but ignoring it could mean obliteration. She gestured sharply. Put it through. The screen flickered, and once again Captain Elias Ward's face appeared. He was calm, almost eerily so, as if the destruction he had wrought was nothing more than a routine procedure. Commander Skrull, he began, his tone neutral but carrying an undercurrent of danger. You've survived longer than I anticipated. A testament to the resilience of your kind, I suppose? Skrull bared her fangs, refusing to let him see her fear. Is this your idea of negotiation, human? If you think the SCI-FI will bow to you, you are deluded. Ward's expression didn't change. Negotiation? No, Commander. This isn't a negotiation. This is an execution. Skrull hissed, her claws flexing instinctively. Your arrogance will be your downfall. Reinforcements are on their way. You may have caught us off guard, but the Dominion will not fall to a single vessel. For the first time, Ward's stoic demeanor cracked, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You think we're alone? Skrull froze, her mind racing. Alone? As if on cue, the view screen zoomed out, revealing more of the nebula. At first, there was nothing but the swirling tendrils of cosmic dust. Then the void itself seemed to shift, dark shapes emerging from the shadows like predators from a thicket. One by one, human vessels decloaked, each bearing the same ominous design as the Retribution. There were dozens of them, frigates, cruisers, and at least 3 dreadnoughts, their hulls glinting faintly in the starlight. They formed a silent fleet, encircling the ruined outpost like a pack of wolves around a wounded prey. The command chamber descended into stunned silence. Even Skrull felt her confidence waver. This wasn't a raid. This was an invasion. You thought the Dominion's purges erased us, Ward continued, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. You thought you had extinguished humanity, but we survived. We endured. And now we are more than we ever were. Stronger. Smarter. United. Skrull hissed, baring her fangs. The Dominion will destroy you again just as it did before. You cannot win against the combined might of our fleets. Ward tilted his head slightly, studying her as though she were an insect pinned to a board. Perhaps. But you misunderstand, Commander. This isn't about winning. His words hung in the air, cold and ominous. This is about justice, he said finally. For Terra. For the billions you slaughtered. For the ashes of our homeworld. Humanity has not forgotten, and we will not forgive. The screen went dark, leaving the chamber in oppressive silence. Skrull's claws gripped the armrest tightly enough to leave deep gouges. Her mind churned, weighing her options. The outpost was defenseless, and the fleet of human ships outside was unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but there was nowhere to run. Commander, the comms officer said quietly, breaking her train of thought. I'm detecting a signal from one of the human ships. It's broadcasting on an open frequency. Play it, Skrull ordered. The speakers crackled to life, and a haunting sound filled the chamber. It was a voice, human but distorted and warped, layered with static and an otherworldly echo. The words were in an ancient Terran language, but their meaning was clear. We are humanity reborn. We are the sword of vengeance. To the Dominion, know this, your reckoning has begun. As the broadcast ended, the tactical officer turned to Skrull, his expression grim. Commander, their fleet is moving into attack formation. Skrull felt the weight of inevitability settle over her. The Dominion had always believed itself untouchable, its supremacy unchallenged. But now the humans were back, and they had brought with them a fury that had been simmering for centuries. Alert the fleet, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Tell them the humans have returned. The officer hesitated. And what should I tell them about us? Skrull's gaze flicked to the ruined command chamber, the fractured view screen displaying the encroaching human fleet. Tell them we held the line, she said softly, her voice laced with a mix of defiance and resignation. Outside, the Retribution led the charge, its weapons glowing like the wrath of a long-forgotten god. The Sarati outpost, once a beacon of Dominion strength, prepared to meet its end. In the silence before the storm, one thought consumed Skrull's mind. Asterisk humanity was supposed to be gone. But now they have returned to finish what they started. Asterisk. The first volley struck with the force of a collapsing star. The Retribution unleashed another searing beam of energy, piercing through what little remained of the Sarati outpost's defenses. Explosions rippled across the station's structure, consuming entire decks in violent cascades of fire and debris. Commander Skrull clung to the remnants of her command chair, the chamber shaking violently around her. The emergency lights flickered as sparks rained from shattered consoles. Somewhere in the haze, a junior officer let out a strangled cry before being swallowed by the collapsing ceiling. Damage report. Skrull barked, though she already knew the answer. The surviving officer struggled to respond. Total structural failure imminent. Reactor core, unstable. We won't last another minute. Skrull cursed under her breath. There was no salvation coming, no miraculous reinforcement fleet to turn the tide. The humans had made sure of that, jamming all communications since the start of the attack. She straightened, forcing herself to stand tall, her tail swishing with defiance. This is not how the Dominion ends, she snarled, more to herself than anyone else. Her sharp gaze turned to the tactical display, or what was left of it. The human fleet moved in perfect synchronization, their vessels weaving through the debris field like predators circling their prey. The Retribution loomed at the forefront, its weapons charging for what would surely be the final blow. Skrull activated the outpost's internal comms, her voice echoing through the surviving sections of the station. All remaining crew abandon station. Evacuate immediately. You will carry word of this atrocity to the Dominion. We must warn the homeworlds. Across the crippled outpost, SCI-FI officers scrambled to escape pods, their claws clattering against the metal floors. Escape pods launched in bursts, tiny specks fleeing the station's ruin. But even as they raced into the void, several were intercepted by human interceptors, their weapons tearing through the pods with surgical precision. Skrull watched in horror, her chest tightening. This wasn't war, it was eradication. The Retribution hailed her again. She hesitated, then signaled for the transmission to play. Captain Ward's face appeared, calm as ever. The distant sound of alarms and muffled explosions on her end contrasted sharply with the serene silence on his bridge. You fought well, Commander, Ward said, almost sounding respectful. But you must understand, this is not personal. This is justice. For Terra. For every child, every city, every memory your kind erased from existence. Skrull's fangs gleamed as she hissed. Justice? This is slaughter. You're no better than the coalition you claim to condemn. You've become what you hate. Ward's expression hardened. Perhaps. But hatred is all we have left. Hatred kept us alive in the void, hidden, rebuilding what was stolen from us. Hatred forged our fleets, our technology, our unity. You and your Dominion taught us that survival is earned with blood. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold and unyielding. And today you pay the price. The transmission ended and the Retribution fired again. The beam struck the reactor core directly, splitting the station apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the nebula. Chunks of debris spiraled into the void, glowing faintly as they cooled. For a moment, it was over. Silence returned to the vast emptiness of space. The Retribution hovered amidst the wreckage, its hull illuminated by the fading light of the destruction it had wrought. Escape pods that had evaded destruction drifted aimlessly, their passengers clinging to what little hope they had left. Deep within the Dominion's core worlds, the transmission from Skrull's outpost finally arrived. It was fragmented and filled with static, but the message was clear. The humans have returned. They are no longer what we remember. They are stronger, and they will stop at nothing. The council chambers of the SCI-FI Dominion erupted into chaos as the implications settled over the ruling elite. The Dominion's military strength, its sprawling fleet, its iron grip over the galaxy, it was all built on the assumption that the humans were gone forever. Now that foundation was crumbling. Back at the nebula, the human fleet lingered for only a moment longer. Then as one, the ships turned and disappeared into the shadows of the void, their cloaking systems rendering them invisible once more. On the bridge of the Retribution, Captain Ward stood silently, staring at the wreckage on the view screen. Another outpost down, his second-in-command said, his voice quiet. Ward didn't respond immediately. His gaze was distant, his jaw tight. Finally he spoke. One outpost, one world, one fleet at a time, he murmured. Until the Dominion is nothing but dust and echoes. For Terra. The crew echoed his words in unison, a quiet chant that carried the weight of generations. For Terra? Ward turned away from the view screen, his eyes cold and resolute. Plot a course for the next target. This is just the beginning. The Retribution slipped into the void, vanishing as silently as it had arrived. In its wake, the wreckage of the SCI-FI outpost drifted, a grim testament to the wrath of humanity reborn. The galaxy would never be the same. The end.